Hello, everyone. We are live. Welcome to this Acumen Academy Fireside Chat. We're so happy you're here. As the virtual room fills up, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat and share with us what part of the world you're joining from. My name is Danielle Sutton, and I'm the content animator for Acumen Academy. Acumen Academy is the world's school for social change, a university reimagined for a world that needs all of us. And our mission is to unleash a new generation of social innovators with the determination and grit to build a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world. And today we are extremely honored to bring you both Cabra and Julia Hoppock for a discussion around digital wellness and the power and pitfalls of social networks as a medium for connection. Cabra is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and Acumen Spain Fellow, working on raising awareness on how technology is changing the way we interact with ourselves, each other, and as a society. She led the technology and data work for the Panama Papers investigation and suffered burnout as a result. And she is now the co-founder of the Self-Investigation, a stress management and digital wellness program for journalists, and also co-founder of ODIS IA, an institute in Spain that promotes an ethical and responsible use of artificial intelligence. Julia Hoppock is the impact producer for Exposure Lab's latest film, The Social Dilemma, which hopefully many of you have had a chance to watch. It is a powerful exploration of the outsized effect of a handful of tech designers have over the way we think, act, and live our lives. Prior to Exposure Labs, Julia worked at the Pew Charitable Trusts, where she ran film and advocacy campaigns to advance environmental conservation, public health, and other public policy issues. She started her career at ABC News and Politico, where she learned the importance of adapting quickly and the power of a story well told. So we are thrilled you're both here. A few housekeeping items before we start. The fireside chat here together will be about 40 minutes, and that includes time for a few audience questions at the end. So please type in your questions in the chat throughout the discussion. I will keep an eye on them, and we will have those near the end of the conversation. And also, I've seen this asked a few times in the chat, but there will be a replay sent to everybody who registered. So if you're having any connection issues or you are furiously typing notes, you can watch your email for the link to the replay recording after the fact, and also follow-up resources that we'll share with you. So now I will pass the mic over to Mar to kick off this interview, and we will get started.
Thank you, Danielle, and thanks so much to Acumen Academy for organizing this event on such an important topic, how technology is changing society and our lives. And we have with us Julia, who's the impact producer of The Social Dilemma. And we both are journalists, we both are millennials, actually. Had similar beginnings to our careers. We started doing TV news, which is what many of us aspire to do when we start our careers as journalists. And I'm not sure about you, Julia, but I would have never, ever guessed that a few years down the line when I started my career, I would be crunching data in front of a computer, being a data journalist and managing a team of designers and developers and engineers that produce stories to win a Pulitzer Prize, on an investigation. In your case, you're now impact producer. That's not normally in the journalism school curriculum, but it didn't used to be back in the day. What does that mean? What does an impact producer do at a production company?
Sure. Thanks, Mar, and congratulations on all your successes. Very exciting. I hadn't even heard of the word impact producer back in my journalism days. But what it does essentially is my role with Exposure Labs is to lead a team that's designing a campaign to ensure that the film has the desired effect on the world long after the buzz dies down from launch. And so that's everything from spreading awareness with tools like discussion guides on our website so you can have a conversation about the film with your network, to collaborating with partners on mobilization action so that people can get more deeply involved in the movement and help us realign technology for the public good.
So it's very interesting because I'm sure that connects with the work many of the people that are listening to us today do. And the Social Dilemma is a film about technology and social media and how it affects our lives. And just for transparency purposes, do you personally use social media and how?
Yeah, sure. So I am on social media now, but I haven't been active for several months, funnily tied to the time working on this film project. And so I would say I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it, and we're just on a break right now. But in the course of doing this project and learning more about the forces behind it, it did give me a little pause. And just, being kind of in quarantine and wanting to spend less time on screens and focus on the work here, I ended up kind of putting a pause in it, but I haven't broken up quite yet. Not sure that I will.
So we're here to talk about the social dilemma, which proposes some solutions on how to have a healthier relationship with technology. And the social dilemma is the second most watched documentary in the history of Netflix. When Exposure Labs, your production company, was making the film, did you expect such a big success?
No, we really didn't. I think it was viewed in 38 million households in the first 28 days. And so we were, pleasantly surprised and humbled by those numbers. And, just to put it into context, when you embark on an independent film project, you don't even know if you're going to get distribution. So really to have a distribution platform like Netflix and then to have those numbers has just been astounding to us. And we feel, really lucky. And I think from the impact team side, we are aware that we now have a bigger platform than we thought we would. And that is, a huge opportunity, but also a huge responsibility to get this work right.
And why do you think you had such a great success in terms of viewings of the film?
I think timing played a big role. The film came out prior to the U.S. presidential election, and people were rightfully concerned about, misinformation and the effects on our election integrity. So I think that was top of mind. And then obviously, the film came out during COVID, and actually the first cut of the film it premiered at Sundance Film Festival in January. And so the filmmakers actually re-edited the film to incorporate misinformation about COVID, recognizing that it just wouldn't be as relevant upon release without that information. And so obviously the content was relevant at the time, but I think the other thing is that, being kind of in lockdown or quarantining, it's only underscored the urgency of our film's message. It's never been more clear that our lives are completely dependent on technology. We rely on these platforms to connect, to live our lives, but they're also undermining democracy and human rights and mental health. And so that asymmetry of power that, a small group of people in Silicon Valley have over the whole world is made even more clear, I think, in these times. So I think that was all part of what really helped contribute to its viewership.
You definitely got millions of people to watch from all over the world, but you also got some important reactions from the tech world, which is not always easy. Facebook actually issued a 7-point statement called "What the Social Dilemma Gets Wrong." What is the impact you're most proud of?
Yeah, that was, we weren't expecting that statement and saw that come out, and it was a sign to us that, we are having an impact. So we are, certainly proud of being in the conversation at the seats of power. That's what we wanted, in Silicon Valley and in Washington, D.C. In fact, I think it was last week at a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina asked Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg if they had seen the social dilemma, and then recommended that they do, tying it to, is this a public health issue for our kids? And so being in the conversation and having that impact and hopefully helping to advance the conversation where the, people have the power to make the systemic change we need is a huge goal of ours. But I think we're even more proud of the way that this film has mobilized young people. We're partnering with this group called Look Up Live, and they are an organization that's focused on mobilizing young people around digital wellness and finding solutions to digital overload and isolation. And, they have a teen council and some university students who, after watching the film, were so inspired. They organized on their own and did an entire youth-led summit where they brought together young people from around the world to talk about how can we solve this problem through advocacy, through political means. And that spiraled into a grant we're doing with them where we're going to hopefully fund some social innovators that are coming up with communications and advocacy solutions to this problem. And so it was we were astounded by that response from young people. And, it just really gives me hope. I think the film has some dark themes, but they came out of it wanting to find answers. And it really gives me hope that we have a new generation of potential ethical tech leaders out there.
And you not only had impact in the US and also touching young people, you also had impact around the world. What can you tell us about what happened in countries outside of the US?
Yeah, we absolutely had a global response to the film, Mar. Netflix doesn't provide us these numbers, but we have friends around the world that took screenshots of their Netflix homepage and sent this to us. So we can say based on that it was at one point in the month of launch, it was the #1 most popular movie in India. I think it was second in Singapore, second in Lebanon, fourth in the UK. And then the other thing is that people are hosting screenings all over the world. We've had almost 3,000 people register screenings on our website in 121 countries. And those are just the people that are registering with us, which we all hope you do if you're doing a screening so you can get access to our tools. We've had, tens of thousands of people register for our virtual tour. And I think in addition to that, we're lucky to have some international partners. We're partnering with Amnesty International, and they've hosted screenings for their international chapters. And we have a great partner with Reset Australia, which is a tech reform group there, and they've hosted a lot of screenings as well. So it definitely has resonated around the world.
And I totally recommend hosting a screening with your community. I've done it in Spain. I did it with the community of Acumen Fellows in Spain, and I've did it also with the community of people that work on ethical artificial intelligence in the association I co-founded. So I totally recommend it. You register the event and you actually get a guide on how to hold these conversations. So it's actually really, really interesting. Totally recommend it. Let's hear more about your work as an impact producer. There's a lot of success behind making a film, but there's also, I think that part of the success, it's your work and the work of your team. When did your work start with the film?
Yeah, I was hired for Exposure Labs in January, actually 10 days before the film premiered at Sundance. So that was a fun crash course in the film and the space. But so I was brought on while they had done the first cut of the film, and we really weren't sure when the release date would be. So we were operating with a lot of unknowns. But on the plus side, I had plenty of lead time, from then until September to develop relationships with partners and potential funders, and to really help develop a campaign plan with that time.
And some people might think that your work really starts taking place after the film is out, but actually planning a campaign is a key part of your work. So what can you tell us about campaign design and the outreach plan that you created?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right that while the film becomes public and that's when people are aware of the campaign, so much work goes in advance. And I'm lucky that I'm part of a large team that has done these impact campaigns before and are really skilled and talented. And they'd actually done quite a bit of work even before I started on board. But if you're designing an impact campaign around a film, I think the first thing to do, and what we did, was a landscape analysis. So that includes looking at who's in the space, what partners should we be talking to, what funders should we be talking to fund our impact campaign, what kind of groups are doing this work, and doing all of that, some of which was already done in the production process and just learning who we should talk to in the film. But with all that, the goal would be to really kind of assess the best that you can, because these things change, but what does the movement need? And where do we fit in based on our unique skill set as Exposure Labs? And so with all of that research, we kind of landed on we're best suited to run an education and awareness building campaign. And so that was our guidepost in all of our campaign design and writing messaging. And with all of that, we shared a lot of our iterations of the campaign plan, which changed many times and continues to evolve with partners and experts in this space. The other thing that we did is that we did a lot of testing to the best of our ability with our audience. Obviously, we would have normally had more film festivals, but with COVID, it did not happen. But we did have some film festivals where we could engage with the audience who'd seen the film. We ran some test screenings and did some user experience testing on the website. all of that we did to figure out, what does our audience actually want to do after they watch this film? What are they likely to do? What themes resonated with them? And, you know, that helped us kind of craft a campaign that both could meet the audience where they were and maybe move them a little bit further along into deeper engagement in the movement. And so all of that kind of helped us with our campaign plan. And there was a ton of outreach, especially when the trailer dropped on August 26th, I think it was. We did a ton of outreach to celebrities, influencers, partners, everyone we could think of to make sure that they could help post and promote the film on the day of launch, just to sort of ensure for a successful launch and to lay the groundwork for the campaign.
You're already touching on it. Storytelling is a big part of the work around building a campaign. And one of the things I really like is the claim of the film that you can see if you check the poster of the film, or if you actually check their website out. It's the technology that connects us also controls us. And in the website, you actually change some of the verbs of what technology does to us. And what's fascinating from the information that you have in your website is that you broke down the social dilemma into 3 clear parts: the mental health dilemma, the democracy dilemma, and the discrimination dilemma. How did you craft the narrative and storytelling to spread the key impact messages?
Yeah, Mar, I think there's sort of 2 pieces of that. I think even before the campaign storytelling aspect, we're lucky that we work with film directors and producers that keep impact in mind when they're crafting their story. And so even the past film that Exposure Labs did, Chasing Coral, they knew that their goal, which is about coral reef degradation and climate change, their goal with the campaign was to reach beyond the choir. So they actually did some test screenings with climate change deniers, because that was an audience that they wanted to maybe change their mind and not alienate completely. And so, you know, you always have that in your mind. And I think there were even creative decisions in the film that set up our campaign for maximum impact. And one is just the decision to focus on tech insiders and sort of have that whistleblower aspect, which we think that, you know, those are really powerful messengers. And then that's probably why the film has resonated as much as it has. The other thing was just recutting the film to include misinformation around COVID, making it more relevant and impactful. So there's that side of it, but there's also storytelling in the campaign too. And as you know, we did break up the 3 dilemmas and provide separate tools depending on your interest area. And that came from the landscape analysis. I mean, not only you have certain partner organizations that are focused on very specific slices of the issue. You have your groups like Common Sense Media and Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood that are focused on the mental health issues associated with these platforms. And then you have other groups that are focused on election integrity. And in talking to our audience members, that was the same thing we were getting, is that people tended to be very passionate about one slice of the issue. And so the decision to break it out into the 3 dilemmas was just a way to respond to what we knew people wanted, and to give them an avenue to connect the film and the issue to their work and to their lives and make it more meaningful. And we think that can help engage you into deeper action, because the movement is broad and it covers many topics, but starting at the place where you feel passionate and feel urged, compelled to take action is kind of the best thing that we can do.
The Social Dilemma is a film about the effects of social media, but in order to tell the message, you had to use social media. So can you tell us more about that decision?
Sure, and that is a decision we wrestled with as a team, and ultimately landed on that was the most important audience to reach. If we're talking about the perils of these platforms, we need to reach people who are on these platforms. If you're talking about the dangers of smoking, you need to talk to cigarette smokers. And so we ultimately decided we were fighting fire with fire and are using social media in a very specific way to help spread awareness about this issue.
Clearly, it's very difficult in today's world to live outside of social media. So it's very interesting. You have actually a code of ethics in your website on that decision, which we totally recommend to read, and we'll send you in the follow-up email so you can check it out. Let's talk about what happened after the film went live. I remember the day we published the Panama Papers back in 2016. After that day, chaos took over my life. And it was very difficult for me to follow all the reactions. So for the team of the ICIJ, the company I used to work for, to follow all the reactions from around the world. How do you track impact And how did you do it after the world went crazy with the social dilemma?
Yes, Mara, you totally get it. It was insane. And again, I have to credit my team. We're lucky that we have a team to do this work. A lot of films don't quite have that. And so, we divvied up some of the assignments for tracking and we did the best we could. And we have a community engagement manager who tracks our social media mentions and the direct messages and kind of engages the community there. And so she was feeding us information all throughout launch. We do have an impact manager who also tracks our general inbox. And I think we have like up to 3,000 odd inquiries. And in addition to that, she collates that information into a report that we were looking at weekly at one point and then moved to monthly. And then, working with Netflix, their PR team right now is tracking press mentions. So basically we had like everyone and their mother, literally mothers, like family members were telling us things that they're seeing and the church group they heard about talking about the film. I mean, you name it. So we had a lot of helpers. Even with that level of staff and attention to it, we did have to make a strategic decision to pull back from spending as much time tracking the impact and reporting and actually taking the time to look at what the reaction had been to the film and start planning for our next phase of the campaign to respond to that. So it's hard, but we actually had to slow down even with all the support that we had.
And you're talking about how you have so many different people in your team dealing with this. I believe that you must be putting also some effort right now on taking care of yourselves. So how are you trying to prevent burnout of your team due to such a great success?
Yeah, that's a great question and something we are actively working on. I think the number one thing is just naming it. We got so tied up in everything that was happening around the launch of the film and just kind of moved into this all hands on deck moment. And it was hard not to feel like everything was urgent. So luckily, a couple weeks after launch, we all kind of realized that was not sustainable and had a conversation about it and set some new cultural norms on our team and kind of realigned, some people to help divide and conquer a little bit better. So I would say it's ongoing, but we have tried to and I think one of the decisions to not track impact in real time all the time, I mean, that was a huge burden to take off. So a lot of it was just saying, it's okay, we're not going to respond to every email, and setting up some away messages on our general inbox that let people know it may be a couple months before we get back to you. Took some of the pressure off, but we're all working on it for sure.
Until when are you going to be working on the film, on the impact side of the film?
Yeah, I think some of that just depends on how this issue plays out and how much how long the film has legs in this space. But I would say generally, based on sort of the past impact campaigns for the film, we tend to be active in a space for 2 years. And then maybe after that, take a more of a passive role. But we're still, to this day, we're responding to inquiries about chasing coral and providing, curriculum and resources to teachers. So I think it'll go on for a long time, but we'll remain active maybe in the shorter 2 to 3 year span.
Actually, the documentary now has a life in itself. How are people making the story their own? You already mentioned a couple of examples of how people are talking about it, but what can you tell us about how people are owning the story?
Yeah, I love that own story. That is something that, it really is cool how it's taken on a life of its own. We certainly have a lot of educators who've been using the film in interesting ways. So we have college professors reaching out to us and saying that they're using the film to launch a new course about digital humanity or ethical design. And so having the film almost be a centerpiece of their courses. And then we have some professors that we just found on social media that are designing hackathons with their students for how they can, design a more ethical social media platform. So people are really just taking it and running with it. There's been a ton of other screenings and interesting things. I think a Facebook intern wrote to us saying he wanted to host a screening in the belly of the beast. So I don't know if that actually happened, but I hope so. And then one thing that's kind of fun is that there's been a lot of fan art. People have just done their own iterations of our film poster, or they've illustrated the dilemmas in a cool graphical way. And some people have even submitted poems to our inbox that were inspired by watching the film. So it really is endless, and it's just very interesting how it struck a chord with people.
That's fascinating. Great to hear that people are even making art, which is great to hear. What are your impact goals that are still pending? Do you have any impact goals still to achieve?
Oh, absolutely. We really only are at the start of this journey. And I think prior to film launch, we realized that, and even now we're realizing that this is just the start of a movement. It's kind of, the movement is young. And so for that reason, we think that we're best positioned to just continue on an education and awareness building campaign. And so it's really all about catalyzing conversations, keeping conversations going about how can we change the way technology is designed, regulated, and used. And so I think that's sort of the start, and the hope would be that we can continue to keep public pressure up on tech companies to make some of the reforms that are needed.
In the website, thesocialdilemma.com, which is your website, there are a lot of resources and different calls to action, depending on the public and depending on the dilemma, as we discussed earlier. In the action part, you actually give 3 distinct calls to action. You can share the dilemma, you can reboot your use, change your use of technology, and help rebuild the system, as you're pointing out, if you're part of a tech company. What is your call to action for the Acumen Academy community, which is formed of social impact leaders?
Yeah, I would say, given that you guys are all leaders in the social impact space, you have a unique platform, and you probably have a pretty sizable influence in your community. So I would say, if you haven't already, please host a screening. Share the film with someone who needs to see it and maybe doesn't want to see it. And, just be part of this movement to help people break out of their filter bubbles. And bonus points if you watch the film and switch phones with your friends to each see what's on each other's feeds as part of that experiment to understand what information we're seeing. And then in general, the issue is changing by the day, and we're working with our partners all the time on developing new actions. We did a lot of demands for Facebook prior to the election. So sign up for our newsletter so you can stay up to date with the latest on those actions. And then I'll give you one more. Our partners at the Center for Humane Technology just launched a campaign called My Social Truth. And it's a story bank for young people to share their experiences on social media and their ideas for how social media could be realigned. So check that out. And if you're a young person or you know a young person, please submit a story, because part of the movement is being able to see yourself in this story.
The documentary makes a great job explaining how technology in itself is not the problem, that the problem is how we design it and how we use it. In this community, there are a lot of people that are using technology to reach people from around the world. So what can you tell us about how can we use technology for good to create social change?
Yeah, I think you guys are doing this. I think a lot of people are doing that already. Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, Arab Spring, these things, they're all using social media platforms in a positive way to organize protests, nurture these movements. And so that just shows the immense, promise of these platforms. So I think that just using these platforms to scale and grow a movement is one really effective way to use social media.
We have so many questions. The chat is buzzing, and I think this.
Oh, Mar, yeah? You left the room and now you're back.
Yes, I'm back. So I was actually handing it over to you, Danielle, and just saying that it's time to hear from the audience and see what questions they have for Julia.
Yes, sounds great. We do have some excellent questions coming in throughout, and I think there will be more in the next few minutes. But let's kick it off with talking about the election. So you mentioned this, Julia, a little bit at the beginning, but in that the timing did play a role. So Micah was asking, how have the results and initial fallout from the recent US election affected your outlook of the future of social media in our world? So, and also just more about that timing. What did election week look like on the Social Dilemma team, given this connection?
Yeah, so for the first part, I don't think the election changed our outlook on the social media platforms and their role in the world. I think it probably just validated a lot of what we thought and a lot of the problems that we've discussed in the film. I mean, there is evidence that there were super spreaders of misinformation. The New York Times just came out with a piece about how really like 5 Facebook groups, or basically 5 people on social media, were the super spreaders for all kind of voter fraud, misinformation out there. And so I think for us, it just proves the point that these platforms are amplifying misinformation and hate speech at a rapid rate. And so I think it just, again, provides more urgency for our calls to action. And then, so election week, it was a blur, I think, for everyone emotionally, just around the world in general, with just all that sustained uncertainty. But we were busy. We were collaborating a lot with the Real Facebook Oversight Board, which is a group of activists and includes some film subjects that are calling on Facebook to reform their platform, and with the intent goal of protecting our election integrity. So we were working with them on a set of demands that some of which got some press pickup and hopefully, added to the conversation there.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Colette asks, what has been your most ideal or ambitious partnership or campaign element, given that the partnering is a great way to amplify the message that you're aiming to share with your campaign?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know about the most ideal partnership, but I think there's some maybe unlikely partnerships. And one is that, we're working with Amnesty International. And I think what's interesting there is they frame this issue as digital rights as human rights. And so they're really looking at that lens about how this impacts marginalized communities and really just broadening it out to a broader human rights issue. And so I think for us, that was a rethinking in our initial discussions with them, a rethinking about the frame. And I think we were very US focused. And so to think of this as an international human rights issue just kind of brought our campaign to a new level of thinking. And so, I think that I think what's the hardest part about the campaign is the scope. We say we want to help change the way technology is designed, regulated, and used. That's a tall order. That's like an order for the entire movement to do for years after, the buzz of the film dies down. And so I think for us, we are just more and more these days realizing that we're just the spark in this broader movement. And so we're trying to right size our activities around that goal.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Shira asked, how can multiple generations and cultures come together around this topic? I love this question.
I love this question too. I think it's, hosting a multi-generational screening. I love it because I think you have the perspective of folks on Gen Z who have never known a world without social media. And I was just talking to some folks who are creating this movement called Log Off. They're high schoolers in Alabama. And they just were relaying to me like how difficult it was for teachers to understand the position. I mean, for them not to be on social media is like absolute social suicide. And so it's just, to understand the need of that, you need someone in Gen Z who is like, I can't live my life without doing this. I will miss out on everything, especially now in quarantine. And then just to have the perspective of, a grandmother who's never understands these platforms and remembers the day of more human connection. So I think just having a discussion and, using the discussion guides as a tool is a great way to start there.
Yes, great idea. So we have a couple questions. People, obviously we have social innovators in the audience who have their own projects and their own big ideas that they are working on getting the word out. And so we have one question from Palak. How does one design the impact and awareness that gets spread, translated into action? So how can someone who has a message they need to spread be intentional about designing this campaign? And David asked a similar question. Producing a film about how current education kills curiosity. What's your advice to make it viral and grow that impact?
Yeah, I think those are really good questions. I think part of it is knowing your audience and also recognizing that there really only is going to be a small percentage of people that take this deeper action. So we kind of see things in this framework. There's like a 90% of people that'll just watch the film and that, maybe they'll just share it with a friend. And then there's 9% who would take a deeper action and host a screening, for example. And then there's the 1% that will actually go and sign a petition or call their legislator or, work with our partners at the Center for Humane Technology and sign up for a humane technology course. And so I think, first of all, just being realistic that it only takes a small group of people for some of those deeper action. And so making sure that you're serving up actions to kind of cater to all those audiences. And then for making things viral, that's tough. Obviously, I think just given we were in this unique position where the film was just really of the moment, and we were lucky to have partnerships with people that were, well connected to influencers that can, promote your film. So I would say, in terms of making it viral, yeah, if you have any connection to people with a large social media following or big influence in the space for your audience, leveraging, developing those relationships early, giving them the tools, social media sharing toolkit, or whether it's talking points or whatever you're doing early. So it's as easy for them as possible to promote the film. And I think it does help to have them do that kind of from day one when the film is launched. But some of it is just luck. I mean, honestly, unfortunately.
Right. Yes. Thanks for sharing that. Lisa asks, and we've had a couple questions more on the for-profit company side and their role in this whole conversation. So how have you seen for-profit companies supporting this initiative and taking action to help shift the narrative, shift the culture?
That's a great question. We've actually heard anecdotally from a lot of for-profit companies, not even in the tech space, I can go there in a little bit, that have said to us, like major corporations said to us, we don't want to be part of the problem anymore, like marketing teams in some of these companies. And so a lot of them are hosting their own internal screenings with their employees and actually having discussions about it that I think are, affecting some policies there. So that's been really exciting to hear. And then it's hard to say, impact is an art, it's not a science, so it's hard to say what things cause other things. But a big goal of our impact campaign is to just keep public pressure up on tech companies. We really do believe that that's the avenue for change. I think policy is such a slow moving beast that this seems a little bit quicker maybe. And so there have been little changes. I mean, they're not enough, but Facebook did take down group recommendations before the election. Twitter did pull down some misinformation. And so we like to, all the work that our great partners in the space have been doing for years and their united call to action right before the election. That's something else. Is really just all about building. If you want the impact, it's all about building the coalition and then finding consensus, which can be really hard. But because the problem of the election was so urgent, a lot of these groups were able to find that consensus, put out discrete demands, some of which were, taken by the companies. So hopefully that all played a role. But either way, yeah, it was good that happened.
Yes. So as we kind of wrap up, this 40 minutes went by at lightning speed, but I would like to start to close with a question for both of you more generally around what your hope is for some of the shifts that will come as a result of this film and all of the conversations and screenings that are happening as a result. Because I think you kind of alluded to, Julia, the film is the catalyst, but really the impact comes from everything after that. And so the work is just beginning. So what do you hope in terms of a mass shift in the way people think about social media and think about technology in general? And this kind of dovetails into a question that Phil shared, which is, how do we navigate this tension and this disillusionment? Because there's positives as well and negatives. So how can we encourage a healthy, honest conversation about this? What are these next steps? And Julia, you can go first, and then we'll pass to you, Mark, for the closing.
Great. Yeah, I think like we said, this is just the start of a movement. And I think that the tension that you're mentioning there is that we're given this false choice. I think number one, we want people to be aware of the problem and realize, take a pause if that's what you need to do, whatever it is, to realize how these platforms are affecting you so that then intentionally decide how you want to use them. But to that point, there is that tension because it's unfair to ask us, the users of these platforms, to, I mean, the choice right now is you renounce, you renounce your participation in these platforms. And if you don't want your data collected, you don't want to be served misinformation, and then you're losing this connection to the outside world. That's not a fair choice. So it really does land on the tech companies. And I think the ultimate dream goal is that there's so much pressure on these tech companies that it actually becomes uncool to work at Facebook or Twitter unless they start to put in practices in place, which they are equipped to do. Friction for sharing content, misinformation, policy guidelines, all these things. Until they do that, that people just walk. So I think that really the change would be within the companies. That's the ultimate goal.
Using a tech platforms analogy, I like everything that Julia said, so I support her message. And what I would like to add is I would like all of you who are listening to us to think, what do you want your relationship with technology to look like? Technology is one more person in our household or one more element in our household. So if it was a person, you would be thinking, how do I want to relate to this person? Well, it's one more element we need to think about. And we actually also have a digital society. So it's very important to know how the digital world works, how technology is affecting our society. What does an algorithm look like? What do they do? How are some of the decisions that are being taken affected by algorithms, by artificial intelligence? And I think that for that, we need to be talking more about digital citizenship and learning a little bit more about how technology is affecting our lives so that we can have more awareness on how it affects us and what we can do to change it. And I would encourage you to start with you and then start doing some research also on how technology is changing the life around you.
Wonderful. Thank you both for all of this amazing information. The chat has many more questions, but unfortunately we won't be able to get to them all. But I just want to thank you both for taking the time to share, and especially you, Julia, to bring us behind the scenes on this whole experience. And the fact that it's just the beginning, right? So there's lots more to come. In closing, I want to share an interesting fact that I learned as we were preparing for this event and this conversation, and that is that early social media growth hackers discovered this idea that if you get 7 new users, if you invite getting new users to 7, wait, I must not have written this down properly. If you invite 7 friends in 10 days to a social platform, you can reach unprecedented scale, and it grows and grows. And the same principle can now be applied to fixing the problem. So our challenge to you listening, in addition to what Mara and Julia already shared, is please share something you learned today or a question or a thought that you have with 7 friends, so that we can increase the awareness about these social dilemmas that are brought up in this conversation and start to shift the way we understand and interact with technology. So thank you all so much for joining. Please watch your email inbox for a recording replay of today, and also links to additional resources and next steps. We will include the pieces that Julia mentioned in her conversation. And also for those of you who are joining our chat outside of Webinar Jam here, please head to the Zoom room that you were sent separately. So that's all for today. Thank you everybody so much for joining, and take care.